Hi, in this first video we're going to create a Hello World application and kind of show you around the basic code here for Silverlight. So let's start by go ahead and creating a new project. We're going to create just the Silverlight application project, and let's go ahead and call it Hello World. Okay, this screen comes up and it's just, here's what we're going to call the web project. An application, a Silverlight application has two parts, and you'll see that in a minute. And then down here we're going to talk about, well, what type of Silverlight framework are we going to target? We're going to target 4.0 for this example. This is just what type of website are we going to have. We're just going to keep the default for now. And we're not going to have RIA services in this application. So just go ahead and hit OK. Alright, as you can see, we created two projects. This is your Silverlight application, and here's your web application. Before we do anything, let's go ahead and run it. And I basically ran it so I can compile it, but you can also see that it's running inside of a browser. It has, this is the page that's coming up, and there's nothing on the page. Okay. Alright. The reason why I wanted to compile it is I wanted to be able to create this file right here underneath the client bin. That's the default location for it. That is called a zap file. It's really just a zip file, and let's go look at the contents of that zip file. So for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and rename this to a zip so I can open it up easily enough. Yep, I'm sure. Okay, so inside here this is just the DLL. This is actually our Silverlight application, which was the top project, and then this is just a manifest of what's inside there. I was hoping that would show us, but apparently not. See if I can open it up a different way. There we go. So you can just see it's just a manifest just saying, hey, just the hello world.dll is the only thing that's in there. Let's go ahead and delete both of those now. So you can see that the zap file is nothing to be scared of. But any dependent DLLs that you end up adding to your application will show up in there. The size of this zap file can get large, and that's kind of an issue you need to deal with, usually after the application's done. Okay, so this is the Silverlight application. This is the Silverlight, when it was compiled, it went into there. All right. Other than that, you're going to have these two test pages. I always get rid of the one, and I rename this one here usually to default, and then I make sure that it is the startup project, or startup page, sorry. Hopefully these two sections here are pretty self-explanatory for you. We're going to go in there for a little bit, and this is just a JavaScript, I guess, file that is used by this page here. Alright, I'm not an ASP.NET guru. I know very little about it, so I won't pretend that I do. But if you come down to here to the body, this is really what I want to show you. There's not a whole lot going on in here. You can see it's basically just one div with one object. And this object is to take 100% of the page. And the source of that object is going to be that zap file. And it's giving you like the color and stuff like this. If you needed to pass a parameter into the application, I don't know, let's say in the case of Oracle, I know this is a SQL Server typically is done with this, but let's say you wanted to use Oracle and you had a framework that needed the connection string. Well, this is a potential place that you can pass that connection string directly into the zap just by creating a new parameter. All right, one thing I want to talk about here is browser caching. As you know, all the browsers try to cache as much information as possible so that they don't have to requery the server to get that information again. And the zap file is one thing that will get cached. And this is treated just like any other resource, like an image, for example. It's my understanding that if you had an image, let's call it apple.jpg, and you added it to a web page, and then later on you go and you change the apple. Instead of maybe a Golden Delicious, it's now a Granny Smith apple. But you keep the name of the file exactly the same. Well, most browsers will see that it's the same resource and still show the Golden Delicious apple and not the Granny Smith. So what you would typically do is rename it to Granny Smith Apple or something like that. It would see that it's a different resource and download it. Well, the same thing's true here. In order to ensure that it's going to get downloaded, we need to change that file name. Well, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do because that file name is based upon that project. Well, through a little bit of research, I found a little trick that kind of works. Is if right here you were to add a parameter, and that's just called version, and you say version equals 1. When you change it to version equals 2, the browser is going to see that as a new resource and download it. Now, what happens to the value? Can you use this value inside your Silverlight application? The answer is no. In order to pass a parameter, you have to pass it that way. So this actually is ignored by any type of code. It doesn't matter what you put in there. You could, instead of version, type in some junk and over here some junk and make sure it's distinct every time. And that way the browser will pick it up when you do a new release. I found the best option is to use version and whatever the version of your application, keep those in sync. That way you can actually look at the source code on the web page and see that value. So if I was to say version 1 here, I go ahead and run it. Come in here and see that it says version 1, and if I had in my application displaying version 1, hopefully they would match up and we know everything's good. Okay, so that's really the tour of the web project. So now let's go ahead and get up here and look at the Silverlight application. The starting point for a Silverlight application is always this zap.xaml, and it will be the constructor of that. So if you go into the code behind of that app.xaml, you'll see here is the constructor. In the constructor, it's going to set up a couple of events that it wants to handle, and then it's going to initialize everything on the control. So during this startup, we're actually going to say, hey, what we really want to display is the main page, and that's this guy here. On exit, we're not doing anything. If we have an unhandled exception, this should get called, which is going to use this guy here to do its work. And that's the end of this code behind for that app.xaml. The actual XAML itself, as you can see, is basically XML. They always start with namespace declarations, and then inside here is where you're going to put any content. For that app.xaml, it's typically resources. For the sake of this application, there are no resources that we need to add. So that really is a tour of the app.xaml, and as we saw, it loads this page. Now this page is our very first, what we call a view. This is typically set up to, very similar to what I just showed you. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create here a new directory called views. You end up with a lot of files in Silverlight, so it's best to have them segregated to where you can see them. So let's go ahead and open that, move it in there, and make sure that our namespace is set appropriately. Okay, great. And that should have moved the declaration inside here to now call hello world.views as the using, so that this now still works. Okay. All right. The goal of Silverlight is to use the MVVM pattern, and we'll get more into that later on. But one of the goals of that is to have basically zero code in your code behind. As you can see, we have very little of it here. I can actually get rid of this because it's actually being declared in a different place, and I'll show you that. And I can get down to that little bit and it will still run. And as you can see, it's up and running even though we have no content. Alright, so in the main page, all we have in this main page is, here's the user control. That's where it's actually being declared, where I was. So that's why I don't need to extend the user control, because it's actually being done right there. Here we have some namespace declarations. Here we are telling it during design time we want to limit the size of our window. During runtime it will actually use the browser's window size to make those determinations. And then down in here is the first bit of content. It's a grid. A grid is a type of a container. It has a name. This is a predefined one for you, and we've set the background to white. So inside here, let's go ahead and add the typical hello world label. Well, Silverlight doesn't really support a label. There's nothing in there that says label. They use something called a text block instead. Text block has a lot more power than a label typically would, but that's what we'll go ahead and use. And so that is the object name. Now the parameters that we're going to pass to it is really just the text. So let's go ahead and say hello world. Okay, and close out our thing. And there you go. We now have hello world. So let's go ahead and run it. And over here you can see where we say hello world in our application, and it's up and running. Okay, so really in a nutshell, that's a hello world application. I'm going to take it just a little bit farther and introduce Expression Blend just really quickly. Expression Blend is really a designer's tool. It's used to work with this markup. As you can see, I just typed this in. It'd be nice if you can drag and drop and do everything kind of visually like you normally are used to. You can kind of do it here, but it's not, Visual Studio is not well suited for it. This other tool is used for it. In order to get to that, you can either open up the solution inside Expression Blend, or you can just right click on the view that you wish to look at. In this case, mainpage.xaml, and say open in Expression Blend. Okay, so we now open this up. I want to go ahead and show that XAML. I can do that by hitting the F11 key twice. It will then let you see it in this type of view. So this is the exact same thing we had before. Over in this section here, it's going to take whatever is currently selected and break it down into a tree view. So right there we have our text block. Okay. So let's go ahead and change how the text block looks. First of all, here we're setting up the foreground. We're changing the colors. You can either do it this way or with a numeric, or you can drag and drop it. Just to show you why you want to use Expression Blend is you can do some pretty neat stuff. So let's go ahead and change this size to a lot larger. Let's go ahead and make it 48. Maybe we'll even change it to something like that. And having this red is kind of boring. Let's do something a little nicer. Let's create something called a gradient. Okay. So as you can see here, we're red on top and blue on bottom, and we progress nice and evenly in between. And that's something simple that you can do in Silverlight. There's a lot more that you can do as far as presentation. It's pretty powerful. I'm not going to get into all that now. I can also center it if I want to, real easily. I can make it down to the lower right-hand corner. Anything like that. So let's go ahead and center it again. And let's go ahead and save this. And get back into Visual Studio. Since the Visual Studio recognized that page changed and wants to reload it. And there we go. Let's go ahead and run it. Okay, so there's our very first Silverlight application. Hello world. Thank you very much.